the fertility decline in Africa is not on track. And here is the dramatic representation of population increase in the long term from 1750 to the middle of this century. The height of those bars represents the decadal increase in population, and those skyscrapers peak in the decade that's just passed, 1990 to 2000. That highest column there represents an increase in world population of 1 billion in a mere 10 years. We will never see the like again. So the skyscraper landscape diminishes. But if you look to the left-hand side and the right-hand side of that tallest skyscraper, you don't see a huge difference. In the last 40 years, the increase in world population was 3 billion. In the next 40 years, it's going to be over 2.5 billion. So in absolute numbers, the future is rather similar to the past. And for the environment, it's not rates of increase that matter, it is absolute numbers. So those who think the population problem has somehow gone away and been solved, they're quite wrong. The increase we're going to see over the next few decades is almost as great as what has happened in the past few decades. I need to go backwards. Only she knows how to go backwards.
Sorry, that's...
What are the causes of population increase? This is taken from work by John Bongartz, and the biggest component of future population growth is something called population momentum, which is the effect of age structure on birth rates. In a population where a lot of people are aged 20 to 40, even if they have small families, the birth rate is elevated, and that keeps population growth at. So the biggest cause of future population increase in the planet is age structure, population momentum. There are two other causes. One is unwanted fertility. About 20% of future increase is represented by children that mothers declare they didn't really want. And the historic mandate of family planning programs is to reduce unwanted fertility. And the third component of future population increase is that, particularly in Africa, but also in North India and a few other places, people want more than 2 children. And anything above 2 children tends to raise population growth in the future. I can't even go forward. This future population increase is by no means even across the major regions of the world. Here we have, for those major regions, population in 2005, projected population in mid-century, and the ratio of the mid-century projected population to current population. We start from the bottom. You'll see the world as a whole is projected to increase by 40%, a ratio of 1.40. Europe, even allowing for migration, which these UN projections do allow for, is projected to decline by 10%. Then you have a middle range of regions where population increases between 30 and 40%, Latin America, Asia, and North America. In North America, that's largely in migration, projected over the next 40 years. In Latin America and Asia is mainly age structure. And lastly, at the top, we see sub-Saharan Africa with a ratio far above other regions, and more than doubling projected between now and mid-century. Now we're going to talk about generations and age structure, and I'm going to use the Republic of Korea to demonstrate the huge importance of age structure on human development. This is Korea in 1960. Mortality had declined steeply, but fertility was still above 6 births per woman. That is the population structure of a rapidly growing population. 45% of Korea's population in 1960 was aged under 15, and only a tiny fraction aged 65 or more. The red bit of the pyramid are the so-called working ages of 15 to 64. I'm going to use that as a symbol, a visual symbol of Africa today. Here's Korea in 2000. In the early 60s, a steep fertility decline set in, and by 2000, the year 2000, fertility in Korea had fallen to about 1.5 births per woman, well under replacement. And you see that swollen mid part of the pyramid, which accounts for population momentum. It also is very favorable for economic development because you have an exceptionally high ratio of potential workers to dependent young and dependent old. Between 1960 and 2000, the number of workers per dependents in Korea doubled. But that wonderful age structure doesn't last. And here's Korea as it will be in 2040. That swollen mid part of the pyramid has now aged, and even though these projections built into them an increase in fertility between 2000 and 2040, nevertheless, the population has aged vastly. The ratio of workers to dependents has gone back more or less to what it was in 1960. So that wonderful era where there were lots of workers, a few children, a few old people, has been replaced by a situation where 20 to 30% of the population are aged 65 plus. This is the destination of humanity. There is no escape. And I'm going to use that figure of Korea as the symbol for Europe. You might notice that funny projection out here. All those women aged 80 plus. This is because Korean women refuse to die, whereas men are killing themselves off in Korea with cigarettes and alcohol. Europe won't have such a huge surplus of women as Korea. So let's turn first to Europe. Broadly, I see the world as three different types of demographic scenario. The advanced industrial economies of the Far East and Europe, faced with population aging and possible population decline. A middle group symbolized by Korea in the year 2000, where age structure is favorable for development because there are lots of workers, and that broadly represents Asia and Latin America. And the third group of countries, predominantly in Africa, where the pyramid is still broad-based and population growth is still rapid. Well, these are pretty familiar to you. It just shows the proportion of people aged over 65 and aged over 80 is bound to increase in Europe over the next 45 years. And looking at another way round, the number of workers, conventionally defined as 15 to 64, to the ratio of those to old people 65 plus, is going to diminish. From in Europe, the left-hand side, from 8 in 1950, 8 workers per old folk, down to 2. Now, I happen to be an old folk, and I do rather resent this convention that the working population is defined as 15 to 64, because in my experience, virtually nobody starts work at 15. All the children of my friends don't start work until they're about 25 because they have gap years between school and university, and then when they've graduated, they drift around the world. So this 15 to 64 is quite a misleading convention. Now, I mentioned that fertility in Europe is roughly 1.5 births per woman, ranging from 2 in France down to a little over 1 in Russia and the Mediterranean countries. If that doesn't change, this is what population structure.